Welcome everybody to Preshow for Monster Monday. I am DM Gallibond, and this is Monster Monday for January 17th, 2022. As always, you are listening to the dulcet tones of Syrinscape as our pre-show music. This is a sound set called Friendly Tavern, and this particular grouping of sounds is called More Music. You can hear in the background, or you can hear in the foreground, the musicians playing. In the background, you can hear sort of the plates clinking and the little murmur of conversation and those types of things. Every now and then, you might be able to hear Kira laugh. And then from time to time, you might be able to hear Sandar laugh. And then, of course, every now and then, somebody has a little bit too much to drink. And that's what you hear when that happens. Alright, so sit back and relax. We'll get started at the top of the hour. I'm going to mute myself. And I am going to get a little sip of my tea. I am drinking Earl Greyer. No, I'm not drinking Earl Greyer. Drinking a different blend. I forget what the name of the blend is that I'm drinking, but it is from the Republic of Teas. So, just a moment. I say the British always must know that I'm a Yank because of the fact that I drink my hot tea with honey and lemon instead of with sugar and milk. I don't know why. I mean, when I drink coffee, I like to drink coffee with cream and sugar. But when it comes to tea, sugar, yes, well, honey preferably to sugar. But milk? Seems kind of weird. I guess it's because, as an American, I grew up drinking iced tea more than hot tea. And we always put lemon in our iced tea. So it just makes sense we'd also put lemon in our hot tea. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and turn this music down a little bit. And I'm going to find us a nice little corner over by the fire. And I am going to bring us over to our slide over here. And welcome everybody to Monster Monday for January 17th, 2022. I am your host, DM Gallibond. And tonight on Monster Monday, we are going to be looking at another monster out of the Acquisitions Incorporated campaign, and that is the Deep Crow. Now, as always, the ambient sound, which you might be able to hear fire crackling in the background, and maybe far off distant whispers of conversation from time to time. This is just like the music at the beginning of the show. This is from Syrinscape. Syrinscape is fast becoming my favorite tabletop accessory for running D&D campaigns because they've got sounds to fit every locale. The other night, the part of the adventure was taking place in a forge, and there's a whole blacksmith shop's sound set there, so you can hear the sound of all the hammers ringing on the anvils and all the work going on in the background and the bellows breathing on the forge fires and whatnot. So it's great, and they have all kinds of different battles for different kind of monsters that you're facing and everything, as well as a bunch of great music for whatever kind of RPG you're running, whether it's a fantasy RPG, sci-fi RPG, or even modern day RPGs. All right, so let's go on and talk about the Deep Crow. Oh, and yes, sorry, before I forget, if you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, click the post notification bell so that you too can get notified of what is happening on the channel and every time we go live. Alright, tonight's monster that we're going to be looking at in depth is the Deep Crow. The Deep Crow, this is an image of it from the Acquisitions Incorporated source book. Though the Deep Crow most immediately resembles a massive version of its namesake bird, this creature is a unique form of avian insect. Seen up close, it can easily be discerned from any other giant bird by its insectoid maw. Its 4-clawed feet and a cluster of red eyes are the most unsettling part of its appearance. So yes, it's got kind of a spider-type eyes going on its forehead, and in addition to the crow beak, it's got these little mandible mouth parts. And then, instead of having 6 legs like an insect, it's got 4 legs. And it appears to be covered in feathers instead of covered in an exoskeleton. Yeah, we're gonna get to talking about some of its influences and my hunches of what it was deconstructed from in a little bit. Alright, so monster lore, the Deep Crow lore. This is all what we get from the Acquisitions Incorporated sourcebook. Some adventurers and sages whisper that Deep Crows were first spawned as the familiars of evil arcane casters, abandoned in the subterranean depths and left to grow to enormous size. Others claim these creatures were once normal crows, transmuted by vile essence and viler powers. But one thing all agree on is that ending up a meal for one of these monsters is a too real threat for those who stumble into their deadly lairs. So yes, we have a little bit of, it's a dreadful monster, and it is supposed to be a pretty evil type of creature, and very scary for adventurers that might run across it. But there's still just a little bit of that Acquisitions Incorporated humor and sarcasm in its description. Alright, now in D&D 5e, all monsters have to have a creature type, and the Deep Crow gets lumped in with the monstrosities, which are monsters in the strictest sense. Frightening creatures, not ordinary, not truly natural, almost never benign. Some are the result of magical experimentation gone awry, such as owlbears and, perhaps, the Deep Crow. And others are the product of terrible curses, including minotaurs and yuan-ti. They defy categorization and in some sense serve as a catch-all category for creatures that don't fit into any other type. Alright, now, we're going to do something a little bit different because our prime candidate is dragons. And instead of going through the entire history of dragons, which, I mean, dragons are in the name of the game, Dungeons and Dragons. So everybody kind of knows what dragons are. I'm just going to focus tonight on the 5th edition version of the dragons that I think stand a good chance of being the influence, the possible influence from or for the Deep Crow and Ancient Deep Crow, which are part of the Acquisitions Incorporated sourcebook. So we're going to go ahead and flip over to the web pages, and the Deep Crow is a CR9 monster. And a CR9 monster from 5th edition Dragons is the Young Blue Dragon. And so we're just going to take a peek at its stat block here, and then we'll do a comparison a little bit later on. The Young Blue Dragon, armor class 18, 152 hit points. It has a 40-foot ground movement, 20-foot burrow movement, and 80-foot fly movement. It doesn't get any bonus to its initiative. It has immunity to lightning. It has some blind sight, dark vision, passive perception that's very, very high. Multi-attack, 1 with its bite and 2 with its claws. +9 to attack, 2d10 +5 piercing damage for the bite. And there's some splash damage from lightning because of its breath. And then the claws are +9, and they deal 2d6 +5 slashing damage. And then, of course, it has its awful breath weapon. A breath weapon that recharges, that will exhale lightning in a 60-foot line, 5 feet wide, and all creatures must make a dex save or take 10d10 damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. So that is the CR9 Young Blue Dragon. A pretty formidable creature, especially when you throw in that the fact that it can fly and it can deal that lightning breath from above on a recharge. Alright, then for the Ancient Deep Crow, that's a CR15 monster, and something that kind of lines up with CR15 is the Adult Green Dragon. Now the Adult Green Dragon, armor class 19, 207 hit points. It has a ground speed, a fly speed, and a swim speed. So it's 40-foot movement on the ground, 80-foot flying movement, which is the same as the Blue Dragon that we looked at, and a 40-foot swim speed. It does not have a burrowing speed. And it's immune to poison. It's amphibious. It has legendary resistance 3 times a day. When dragons get to be adult age or older, they get that legendary resistance. They also pick up legendary actions. The multi-attack, it's the bite and the claw. Once again, the bite has residual poison damage because of its breath weapon. It also then picks up a tail attack when it becomes an adult and higher. And it also gets this frightful presence. So it can choose any creature within 120 feet, and if that creature fails a wisdom save, it becomes frightened for a minute. And it can just kind of do that at will, that frightful presence. And then poison breath, or I guess actually not at will. It takes an action to do that, so it would use its action to do the frightful presence. Then the breath weapon, again, recharges 5 or 6, and this is a 60-foot cone. Have to make a con save, or you take 16d6 poison damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. And then it gets legendary actions. And legendary actions are things that a monster that usually is kind of a boss tier or boss type monster for that you would fight and doesn't often have any allies with it when it fights. Legendary actions are things they can do at the end of another creature's turn. So basically, instead of getting its normal complement of action, bonus action, and movement on its turn, and then reaction, one reaction when it's not its turn, it gets all of those. It gets its own action, its own bonus action, its own movement, and its own reaction. And on top of those, it also gets legendary actions that it has to use at the end of another creature's turn. Now, a reaction can be used at any time during another creature's turn, but legendary actions, you have to wait till the end of another creature's turn to use those. And it gets 3 of those every round, and those recharge at the beginning of the dragon's turn. So there's a wisdom check it can do as a legendary action. There's a tail attack it can do as a legendary action. And there's a wing buffet that it can do. It flaps its wings and causes a stir in the air, which can knock creatures prone and deal bludgeoning damage to them. Alright, so now let's look at the normal Deep Crow, the CR9 Deep Crow. It's got an armor class of 17, 133 hit points. It has 2 movement modes. It hops like a bird, but it's got 4 legs. Okay, so it moves on the ground at 20 feet and it flies at 80 feet, which is the same speed as those dragons. It doesn't have any immunity to any damage types. Interesting. It's got blind sight, dark vision, decent passive perception, magic resistance. Okay, now it picks up magic resistance, and it's got shadow stealth. So when in dim light or darkness, Deep Crow can take the hide action as a bonus action. And since these things are usually subterranean, I mean they're huge, large birds, but they're subterranean. So I mean it's kind of a weird thing. And it's got sunlight sensitivity. So the shadow stealth and the sunlight sensitivity are in line with an underground creature. The only thing that kind of is weird about an underground creature is a huge, a really large flying creature. That's the only thing that's a bit odd. Multi-attack, it makes 3 attacks, 1 with mandibles, 2 with its claws. So the mandibles are +9, and they hit 2d10 +5 piercing, and they can grapple a target. And then the claws +9 and deal 2d6 +5 slashing damage. Now notice the normal Deep Crow does not have a breath weapon. Alright, so now let's go to the Ancient Deep Crow. Ancient Deep Crow, a little bit better armor class, a little bit more hit points, same movement. Now, it doesn't have any immunities, but now it picks up some resistances. But basically it picks up resistances to non-magical attacks. So any attacks that aren't magical deal half damage, basically. It has magic resistance and shadow stealth. Has multi-attack, the mandibles and claws. So again, a little bit more damage, a little bit better attack bonus, but the same thing as the normal Deep Crow. Same thing with the claw. Little bit better bonus, a little bit more damage. But now it picks up a shadow caw. Ancient Deep Crow releases an ear-splitting caw. Each creature within 60 feet of the crow and able to hear it must make a Constitution save. On a failure, they take 3d6 psychic damage. Well, it's not a breath weapon. But notice, and it's got the 60-foot range, but notice, It's not a cone, it's not a line, it's a 60-foot radius. So it's 360 degrees, 60 feet around the ancient deep crow. So it doesn't help you if you're trying to fight it from behind it. You're still affected. And also notice what else it doesn't have. It doesn't recharge. So it can use this Shadow Claw every single round. And it can deal now the 3d6 damage. Now the other thing that's important is that it's an all or nothing damage thing. You fail the saving throw, you take the damage. You make the saving throw, you take no damage. So that's a trade-off. It can do it every time, but it's not guaranteed to deal damage. And then it does have legendary actions. So it can take 3 legendary actions. It can do that same wisdom check, just like the dragon. It can do the Shadow Claw, which is essentially its version of a breath weapon. And then it can do that wing attack, which is similar to the wing attack that the adult green dragon gets. So that's kind of where they stack up. And then when we get a little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about deconstructing the Deep Crow and the Ancient Deep Crow. And we will go a little bit more into depth about the comparisons between those monsters. Alright, now, let's take a look at using Deep Crows in encounters. And I'm not going to do this for both of the monsters. I just went ahead with the highest CR monster, which is the Ancient Deep Crow. And we're going to think about how do we create a hard encounter with an Ancient Deep Crow. So if you have a party of 5 PCs, and those PCs are either level 10 or level 11, then putting them up against a single Ancient Deep Crow, that's a hard encounter. You don't have to add anything else to it. Now, if your adventurers are between level 12 and level 14, it becomes a medium encounter. And for a level 14 party, to make it a hard encounter, you can add 1 Umber Hulk to the fight. So have an Umber Hulk and a Deep Crow, and that would make a hard fight for the party. Then level 15 through 19, for a party of level 15 through 19, that's an easy encounter. And for a level 19 party, if you want to make it a hard encounter, you can add a Deep Crow to that, and it will go ahead and it will turn that into a hard encounter for that party. So you could potentially have like an Ancient Deep Crow and perhaps maybe one of its offspring. Although there's not a whole lot talked in the lore about what the relationship between the parent Deep Crow and the offspring are. So you could flavor that or explain that however you wanted to. Alright, now if you are a player and you're in a party and you come up against a Deep Crow, alright, be observant. So all Deep Crows can take the hide action as a bonus action when they're in shadow. And if you're underground, they're probably going to be a place that it can be in shadow. So just beware of that. Now the second thing, save your spells. Because all Deep Crows have advantage on their saving throws against spells and magical effects. If you absolutely have to use spells, then either use spells where the target doesn't get a saving throw, or where even if they do get a saving throw, it's still going to have some kind of effect. Deal damage or do something to them if they make their saving throw, because the Deep Crow is going to get advantage on that. And then do something to close your ears, because Ancient Deep Crows emit that caw that is so powerful, it deals psychic damage to creatures within 60 feet that can hear it. So, it lets out that caw, and you fail your saving throw. Oh, ouch, it's going to hurt your brain. because it is so powerful. And then shine your light. If you're fighting a normal Deep Crow, they have disadvantage on attacks and perception checks that rely on sight when they're in sunlight. Now, the Ancient Deep Crow doesn't have that limitation, so it won't work against an Ancient Deep Crow, but if you have some spell that will emit sunlight, or a weapon like a sunblade or something like that that will emit sunlight, then you can cause the Deep Crow to have disadvantage on its attacks against you for wielding that kind of thing. Alright, now, DM tactics with a Deep Crow. So, if you are behind the screen and you're running an encounter that has a normal Deep Crow, keep in mind that the Deep Crow will use darkness and shadow to its advantage. So one tactic might be to have it attack the party from the air, descending to rake at 2 of the party members with its claws, while it tries to pluck another one from the ground with its mandibles. Because remember, if it hits with those mandibles and the target doesn't make the escape DC, it can grapple them, and then it can pick them up off the ground and carry them around. And of course, the person grappled, when the thing takes off and flies into the air, it can try to get away, and the Deep Crow may just decide, oh, you want out, and just release it and let it fall, and perhaps crash to the ground if it doesn't have something like Featherfall, or doesn't have some kind of a fly spell to help it avoid taking massive damage with a rapid stop at the end of the fall. So then an Ancient Deep Crow, if you're running that, maybe you want to have that Ancient Deep Crow wait in shadow, completely motionless, until the party comes into range of its Shadow Claw. Since his ability doesn't require recharge, it might use this every round if it can stay out of weapon or spell range from the PCs, and it might spend 2 of its legendary actions on a Shadow Claw at the end of another creature's turn in any given round. So that is, those are some things to keep in mind when you are using a Deep Crow in an encounter and you mean to make it a test for your party. It's just always make sure that you open with its most powerful ability, and then after you do your opening, then you want to go ahead and tactically have it do figure out what it can do to deal the most damage on every turn with the least amount of exposure to damage from the party. Alright, so now where would you place a Deep Crow or an Ancient Deep Crow in the campaign? In the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure, an Ancient Deep Crow appears at the end of the mini-campaign when the PCs are only level 6. Okay, so we said that an Ancient Deep Crow, it doesn't become a hard encounter for the party until they reach level 10. They're level 6. It's a deadly, and not only a deadly, it is a wipe the floor with the party deadly encounter. So what the heck is Acquisitions Incorporated doing, sending their 6th level adventuring group up against a CR15 monster? Well, the answer to that is they're doing a typical Omen drawn move. I'm not going to fight that. Hey, franchisees, you go fight that for me. And sending them off to their certain doom. But in the adventure, these tier 2 adventurers are not expected to fight the capstone monster. No. They are expected to realize that this monster is depressed because it desperately wants to find another Deep Crow to mate with. Yes. Acquisitions Incorporated is sending you out to face a lovelorn monstrosity. And you're supposed to play relationship counselor instead of fighting it. Alright. So now this is clearly a thing that would only happen in an Acquisitions Incorporated adventure. They might as well have Weird Al Yankovic be one of the writers for Ack Inc. because it's just kind of everything they do is something of a parody of a normal D&D campaign. Now, in your campaigns, unless you typically run non-traditional, big monster that you're not always supposed to fight campaigns for your party, and your players are used to you doing that, there's always a risk of putting an overwhelming enemy in front of any D&D party. Because the natural instinct for the players is to attack first and ask questions later. If you think about the Suicide Squad movie from last year, where Bloodsport was leading that team, and they were going in, and they were told they had to find the guy that had been captured. So they go into this place, and they just start killing everybody that they see and whatnot. And then they find the guy, and he's sitting there drinking coffee with somebody, and they're like, "What are you doing drinking coffee?" "Oh, yeah, these people rescued me." "Oh, yeah, well, we just killed all your allies." So that's always the danger with putting a monster in front of a D&D party that they're not supposed to fight. They are just liable to go and start hacking away at it and then ask questions of it later. So your players need to know that you have a history of building encounters that don't always require combat to win. So if you are going to use an ancient deep crow in your campaign, it darn well ought to be a late game monster that is either the BBEG itself, or big bad evil guy itself, or it's a very important operator in the big bad evil guy's syndicate. So maybe it's maybe it's in charge of something in the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure. I think it's just basically like guarding a tunnel. That's all they have it doing. It's just sitting there guarding a tunnel. And there's evidence that if the PCs are paying attention, there's evidence they will find that will let them know, hey, there's something weird about this big monster. Yeah, it looks scary, but it's not acting like it's about to make us dinner. And if they look at the clues around them, they'll figure out something is going on, and that might prompt them to talk to the monster. At your table, I'm just going to trust your party well enough to realize what's a good idea to throw at them and what's not a good idea to throw at them. Hey, Goonie, hey, thank you so much for the subscription. And yes, exactly. Exactly. All right, so now let's go and let's reverse engineer, deconstruct, if you will, the Deep Crow, looking at the similarities and differences between the Deep Crow and the Young Blue Dragon, which is also a CR9 monster. So, the Deep Crow's claw and mandible attacks have the same attack bonus and damage as the Blue Dragon's claw and bite attacks. But remember, the dragon gets splash damage because of its breath weapon on the bite attack. The Deep Crow does not have resistance to spells and magical effects. The Deep Crow does have resistance to spells and magical effects. The Blue Dragon does not have that, or the Young Blue Dragon does not have that. The Deep Crow has the Shadow Stealth and Sunlight Sensitivity features. The Young Blue Dragon does not have those. Now, remember, Shadow Stealth is an advantage in its natural environment. Sunlight Sensitivity can be something that the PCs exploit. Those are there for the normal Deep Crow, but not for the Young Blue Dragon. Now, the Deep Crow does not have damage immunity, nor does it have the breath weapon, nor does it have a burrowing speed of the dragon. So the dragon has a few features there that the Deep Crow does not. And when you compare their, headline stats, the Blue Dragon has a higher AC, so it's harder to hit, and it's got more hit points. So looking at the CR9, they are kind of elevating. It seems like they're elevating the Deep Crow a little bit because they are putting the emphasis on that resistance to spells and magical effects, and possibly elevating the advantage that the Deep Crow gets in its environment from having the Shadow Stealth feature. Because those are the main things that the Deep Crow brings to the table that the Young Blue Dragon does not bring to the table. And that's how, at least in the minds of the D&D developers, they say that makes it on an equal challenge rating with a Young Blue Dragon. Now, you may look at that and you may think from your perspective, it doesn't seem like it's quite as tough. Maybe it's not worth that. And then you should keep that in mind when you consider when and how you're going to use it. If you think that an actual Blue Dragon would be a challenge for your party, and you think about what abilities your party has to bear or brings to bear in a fight, maybe a Deep Crow is the same kind of challenge, and maybe the Deep Crow is not as much of a challenge. Or, in some cases, like if they're in the dark and all the party are humans and none of them have dark vision, well, maybe the Deep Crow has more of an advantage because of that shadow stealth and everything. Alright, so now we're going to take a look, and we're going to do the same thing looking at the Ancient Deep Crow with respect to the Adult Green Dragon, which is also a CR15 monster. So, once again, when we look at the physical attacks, the Ancient Deep Crow's claw and mandible attacks have the same attack bonus and the base damage as the Green Dragon's claw and bite attacks. However, the Green Dragon has that poison splash damage on its bite, which the Ancient Deep Crow does not. The Ancient Deep Crow and Adult Green Dragon both get 3 legendary actions every round. So they're both able to use those legendary actions. The Ancient Deep Crow has resistance to spells and magical effects. Now, the Green Dragon doesn't get that, but what it does get is it does get 3 legendary resistances every day. So that means that the Green Dragon, it rolls a saving throw. It fails the saving throw. It can say, oh, no, I choose to make that saving throw instead. And it gains those legendary resistances. The Ancient Deep Crow has a Shadow Stealth feature. The Dragon gets a Frightful Presence feature. So the Ancient Deep Crow can hide. The Dragon can make everybody afraid of it. And the Dragon's range on that Frightful Presence is pretty big. I think it's 120 feet as an adult dragon. So the Ancient Deep Crow has a breath weapon, in air quotes. Breath weapon, same range, 60 feet, but remember it's a 60-foot radius, so it goes all the way around the Ancient Deep Crow. It's not a cone or a line. So the area that breath weapon, if you will, that caw, covers is greater than the area that the dragon's breath weapon covers. However, the psychic damage that the caw deals is significantly less than the poison damage of the dragon, and also that psychic damage is an all or nothing. If you fail the saving throw, you take all of it. If you make the saving throw, you take none of it. Whereas with the with Dragon's Breath weapon, even if you make the saving throw, you still take half damage. You have to have some additional abilities, and I believe it's the Constitution save. So I don't even think that abilities like the Rogue's uh, uh, evasion, or what is the lower tier than evasion? It gets the um, whatever it is, where it can jump out of the way and take half damage on a dex save that it fails. It doesn't even get that. All right. Then the Ancient Deep Crow does not have the damage immunity nor the amphibious nature and swimming speed of the dragon. Also remember when we talk about that caw that the Ancient Deep Crow has, there's no recharge on that. It can use that every round. So, and it's not like, it's not like once you make the save, you're immune to it. It's like every time it does that caw, you have to make a saving throw. So if your party, as a 10th level and above party, if your party doesn't have any way of dealing range damage out beyond 60 feet or out to 60 feet, then the Ancient Deep Crow can just sort of kite the party and run along or fly along and caw at them every round, and caw at them using its bonus action or using its legendary action every round, and eventually it's going to start whittling them down when they fail those saving throws against that Shadow Caw. And then finally, looking again at the headline numbers, the dragon has a higher AC and more HP than the Deep Crow or Ancient Deep Crow has. So once again, there are things that the designers at Wizards of the Coast seem to value more than others. So that that magic resistance versus the legendary resistance, that seems to elevate it. Now, something that they both get the legendary actions. The Shadow Stealth feature seem to put that on the same value, or they value that just as much as the Frightful Presence. I think the big thing that probably helps to push the Ancient Deep Crow up to a higher CR than its other stats might indicate is the fact that Shadow Caw can go off every round, and it can actually go off potentially twice every round, on its turn and on its legendary action. So it could be doing that burst of potentially 3d6 psychic damage to everybody within range if they all fail their saving throws every round, twice around. So that really adds up, and that may be what helps to push it in the minds of the developers of the monster and the designers from Wizards of the Coast. May be able to push it up to that same par with the adult green dragon. So again, thinking about your game, thinking about the capabilities of your players, the sort of damage mitigation and all the other kinds of things that they have and the resources they have at their disposal, you may say that yes, fighting an Ancient Deep Crow is just as tough for them as fighting an adult green dragon, or you may decide that one of those monsters is tougher than the other. That's kind of up to you. But when you're going to think about creating homebrew monsters, it's interesting to see between the CR9 version of the Deep Crow and the CR15 version of the Ancient Deep Crow. It's interesting to see how the Wizards of the Coast monster designers think. And then if you want to create something that in your game is on a par with the difficulty level of those monsters, what kind of homebrew tweaks you would add to it. Now, I have 3 games that I run, and 2 of them are pretty much games that are just by the book. I don't add much of anything to them. I don't take much of anything away from them because the characters are all relatively vanilla in terms of all the abilities they have are just straight out of the book. There's nothing special designed about it. My Sunday game, however, all of the players or all of the characters either currently are or are on the verge of becoming full-blown planeswalkers. And when they get that planeswalker class, if you will, it's kind of a custom class that's a hybrid of up to 3 different classes. And because I've been very liberal with how they can choose abilities across those classes, there are some rules, but it doesn't restrict which ones of those abilities they can take out of those classes. It's anything they want as long as it has the prerequisites to build upon from those 3 classes. Then that can build a character that's significantly more hardy than any character out of any one class, or even a multi-class character in the traditional sense of a multi-class character. So this gives those adventurers the ability to kind of pick and choose what's going to optimize their character build. So when I homebrew monsters for them, I have to take what would normally be a challenge, and I have to, just like a Merrill, I have to boom, kick it up a notch. Part of that usually is adding more hit points because of how hard most of the PCs can hit, and the amount of damage that as a party they can dish out every round. You want the fights to feel satisfying, and that means have them last long enough that the monsters get in a couple of good licks so that the parties feel like there's some danger there. And so that means they have to survive a little bit. Also, sometimes it means giving them some special abilities that monsters in traditional D&D 5e wouldn't have. So, lets them do things that are a little bit unexpected and that they've never seen before. Especially because a lot of these monsters have influences coming from Magic the Gathering. So a lot of the things the monsters can do make them feel more like what it says on the card in Magic the Gathering these monsters do. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's take a look over at the Q&A. Okay, if anybody, I don't see any questions right now, but if anybody has questions about the Deep Crow, I'm going to go on into the wrap-up, and then I'll come back and take a look at this once again. Alright, so I have been DM Gallibond. This has been Monster Monday, looking at the Deep Crow. No, shame on me. I didn't update that from last week. It's not the Clockwork Dragon anymore. It's the Deep Crow. You can find me here 4 days a week doing live streams. 3 of those times it's actual play games. Sunday afternoons at 2 p.m. it's my Planeswalking D&D game. Mixes 5e and Magic the Gathering. We are, as I said, in a plane that is inspired by the Arabian Nights set right now, and they are in a dungeon crawl. Good old-fashioned dungeon crawl, where go to one room, they got a fight. Go to another room, maybe there's a fight, maybe there's not a fight, maybe there's a trap, maybe there's not a trap, but just boom, 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 constant going on in that game right now. Thursday nights, Sword Coast Chronicles. It's a homebrew story told through the lens of the published 5th edition campaigns. Right now, we are in the storyline of Storm King's Thunder, and they are getting ready to go after Imrith, the Doom of the Desert, in that game. They're gearing up for a big fight, and they've got some allies in that fight. Saturday night, we go old school for Saturday Night Greyhawk, and we are right now into the depths of the Temple of Elemental Evil. They had their first foray into the temple, got a bunch of loot, found a key to basically destroying the temple, or part of the key to destroying the temple, and now they've learned what else they have to go back and get. And they kind of know there's a little bit of a ticking clock because they basically set off an alarm the last time for the people that run the temple, and at some point there's going to be reinforcements coming to help the people that are defending the temple. Can they get their mission done before those reinforcements show up? Well, you have to tune in on Saturday nights and find out. And then, of course, Monday night we do Monster Monday. All right, you can find all of our live streams simulcast on Twitch and on YouTube. All the archives of everything is over on YouTube. We do have a Patreon for anybody that wants to help us out and see if there's more stuff that we can do. Next Monday, we will be back with another monster, and we're about halfway through the brand new monsters that were introduced in Acquisitions Incorporated. Next time, we are going to be taking a look at the Keg Robot. So, another typical AI monster, something that's a little bit goofy and a little bit quirky, and probably has a bit of humor involved. So now, let's go back and let's take a look, see what questions. Okay. What would you say is a good way to defeat the Caw of the Deep Crow? Well, it affects everybody that can hear the Caw. So perhaps putting silence on the party members would help. That then means that they might be limited if they are spellcasters in what spells they can cast. So things that require somatic and material components you would be able to use. Things that require verbal components you would not be able to use. But if you can keep the party at in magical silence so they can't hear the caw of the monster, that would be a way of counteracting that. But of course, as we said, spellcasters in the party, you're going to hurt them. Also, unless your party has worked out a sophisticated system of visual hand signals, which if you're fighting in the dark, how are they going to see those? All that kind of stuff. That would also tend to be possibly a detriment to the party, as well as defeating the big breath weapon, in air quotes, of the ancient Deep Crow. So yeah, thank you. It's a good question, Goody. All right. I think what we're going to do, we're going to go back to our sound set. We're going to bring up the music, and then I am going to bring us to the credits here, and I will go over and look to see if anybody else is streaming some D&D, and if they are, we will go ahead and we will raid them. So let's see about raiding another stream here. Alright, so we'll do this, and then we'll do this, and okay, it looks like they're getting ready to start a session of Terra Invicta over in Caleb's channel, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to raid Caleb's channel. Perhaps we'll get a chance to see a session of D&D over there. Alright everybody, Thank you so much for hanging out. We hope you have had a good time tonight. We hope you learned a little bit of something about the Deep Crow that can help you. Good night, and remember, as always, watch out for the monsters under the bed. Take care, everybody.